Hey folks, we've talked a fair bit about boxes on this particular channel. Judging from the hits I've gotten, a lot of people actually enjoy seeing how the boxes and such are put together. And it can seem sometimes like you might be a little bit limited on the size box you can make with something like a CNC machine. That you're limited essentially by the thickness of your wood and how far up the machine can travel. But that's not necessarily true. One of the things that you can do with a machine like this is something called finger joints. Now, this box is about 4 inches high, which normally you're not going to get your mill up that high to mill anything. But you can mill the pieces to where they've got these little squared off bits that just lock together like a set of fingers and make any kind of box you like. You can make lots of different sizes and shapes with this. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how to do finger joints on a CNC and some of the things you might need to consider when doing it. Okay, now one of the things you'll notice when you first get your CNC is that the cutting area, like say on this one, this is a Shapeoko 3, is supposed to be 16 by 16. And this is 16 inch. You can kind of see the edges from where I surfaced my wasteboard. But 16 inches going here actually comes out in front of the machine, and that's because when the router is all the way forward, it's a good 3-4 inches in front of that machine. Now, a lot of that might seem like wasted space, but what it actually lets us do is mount wood to the front of this machine. And you can mount a very long board here and cut across the top of it like that. And the goal there is to create these finger joints. Now typically when we work with what we're doing here, we're used to cutting things flat on the board, right? The problem is, and you can see with these, they look very rounded at the edges. So when you get these little round pieces here, it's going to be difficult to get them to seat all the way in the wood, right? So you've got something like this, and you've got these little gaps. What we really want is something a little more like this. See how these are nice and flat? And that's what using this front piece is going to let us do. So what we need is a way to mount boards to the front of this, keep them straight, and be able to do it on a consistent basis. So we're going to create a jig to do just that. So what we're going to be building today is this finger joint jig. Basically what this is there are 3 pieces. There's a front piece, a back, and then this piece underneath. The piece underneath holds our boards in place and makes sure they're at a nice 90-degree angle across here, right? So we're going to put 2 boards in, and we're going to cut 2 sets of finger joints at once. The front and back piece have these long screws on them so that they can clamp the boards in place, right? So they'll clamp our pieces in place and hold them still. These pieces are essentially a set of sacrificial jaws. What they do is they keep us from tearing that wood out when we cut across it. So when we're cutting like that, the bit's going to want to tear that wood out, but if we clamp these together nice and tight, then this will support the wood. And you can see I've actually made a couple of cuts with this particular set of jaws. Now, the nice thing about something like this is that you can cut any size finger joints you like. These are all just about 1/8 inch, and that was just for my purposes what I needed. But you could cut 1/4, you could cut larger than that depending on how big your material is. You can cut passes for drawers if you wanted to assemble a bunch of drawers, being able to put them in. If you needed to do a particularly wide set, like say you were building a tool chest, you could eliminate the centerpiece here and here and then have this full room all the way across to cut your finger joints and just make a similar pattern to this. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over how I made the files for this. I'm going to put the files up on Cut Rocket, so you'll have access to those. What I am going to talk about mostly, just so this doesn't get too terribly long, is how to assemble this and put it together and how to use it. Like I said, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I did kind of want to just show you the two files that come with this for creating the jig. So basically, this is the back piece and this is the front. And you'll see from the toolpaths, these are the little cutouts. These are pockets that those soft jaws will fit into. This will duplicate those and give you a pattern for cutting out those soft jaws. The backing piece here is cut out this way, and all it uses is 3/4 plywood, and I use a 3/4 MDF when I create the soft jaws. But this is the cutout file that cuts out all of the top piece. And then there's a back piece that simply looks like this. Now what I did here is I just used these as spacers to make sure that I line this up with the piece that it fits above. So you've got a pocket here and then your cutout. And this will be the piece that sits underneath that holds our boards at a 90-degree angle. Okay, so once you've done your cutout, there are three basic pieces to this. There's this front piece, which will be used with this back piece to form kind of a clamp that'll hold your pieces on the front of the machine. Then there is a backing board that is going to fit like this and flush, so that when you use things on the front of the machine, basically they're going to fit in there like this. Okay, and we'll go ahead and get all these together, but the first thing you have to do is you're going to want to take these two pieces and clamp them together so that they're fitting the way they're supposed to, and then you're going to need to drill your holes here in the front so that we can run these bolts through that will allow us to loosen and tighten this piece. One other thing to notice on this is that you can do this one or two ways, but you've got this channel piece here at the front of the machine that sits up a little higher than your wasteboard. And in order for this to sit flat, what I did was I simply took a piece of 1/4 inch and glued it to the back of this so that it fits right up on front and stays nice and level. You can do that, or you can cut a channel along this back if you want, that fits in this. Either way, this has to lay flat, otherwise your joints are going to come out a little bit crooked, and we don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp these up, and I'll show you how to drill the holes, and we'll take it from there. Okay, and we're going to use these holes to line up for where we put our inserts, and I'm also going to drill down a little further into these because we actually want to be able to have that screw go in and seat further down in here. So we'll go ahead and drill these out a little bit further. Okay, so on this end of things, we're going to use these little 1/4 inch threaded inserts that we're going to put down into here, and that'll let us run our screw all the way through the other piece and attach into here and act like a vise when we want to tighten this down. Now, if you've ever dealt with these before, they're pretty cool. You use something like a T-bar to put them in, and they just screw right into the T-bar, and then you screw them down into the wood and twist free, and it leaves the insert behind. So we need to drill these holes a little bit bigger. This is a 9mm drill bit, and we'll go ahead and drill these a little bit bigger so we can get these inserts in without cracking the wood. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and brace this just to keep us from splitting our wood here, and see if I can drive one of these guys in. Okay, give it a quick twist, and that should pop the T-bar loose and leave our insert in there. Okay, now let's go ahead and do that with our other holes as well, and we should be good to go. So I've got all my bolts in. Looks like I'm going to be able to tighten this up okay, and seems like things are pretty well lined up. So we'll go ahead and take it from there. Okay, so this is our back piece. It's going to fit right here on the machine. So I want to go ahead and glue this piece, which will fit up against here. And I need to make sure that those are at a 90-degree angle. So I've got some rather over large 90-degree pieces here that I'm going to use to help me line this up. The main thing I need to do with this is I have to make sure that this is at a 90-degree angle and that these pieces here are flush so that they line up and I can, rest my boards against these when I go to make my cuts. So let me get this straight and then I'll get some glue on it. Okay, so now that we've got this guy glued up and I've got him lined up and bolted on with the holes in my wasteboard so that he fits flush up against the front like this. The next thing we're going to do is I've cut a set of sacrificial jaws. The pattern for this is in with the files, and these fit in like this, right? And they should be fairly flush with this piece here. The larger two fit on this smaller front piece, and like this, so that when these two pieces come together, they let us clamp our board in nice and tight. Now, what these sacrificial jaws will do is when we're going back and forth with our bit, they'll keep us from tearing the wood out. And I'll show you everything once we get the pattern set for cutting our finger joints, and it'll give you a little bit better idea of what these are doing. So one other thing to note is these little screw and knob assemblies. They're a fairly simple design, and I've included the files in with this. They'll be on Cut Rocket with everything else. It's a knob that's cut out like this, and there's a hexagonal pattern in the back. And basically you take any 1/4-inch bolt, shove it down into there with some epoxy, and then there's a small circular piece that fits on top of it like a washer, and that just allows it to sit up a little bit on the board when you're screwing things down. They're very easy to assemble. You'll notice mine, I've used a couple of different color hardwoods that tell me essentially what length any of these are. So purple heart, maple, and red heart. So the red hearts are the very long ones, purple's next size, maple is a smaller size. And these are just a good way to clamp things down to your board, and they're a heck of a lot cheaper and more flexible than buying them from a catalog somewhere. Okay, so once you've got everything assembled, you should have something like this. You should have your soft jaws here. Mine already have some notches in it just from the test cuts that I've made. This should be attached to your wasteboard. Mine, since I simply have all the screw holes, I've just aligned these up and bolted it down here. These pieces will let you adjust your clamping on the front, and this is where we're going to align our boards. Now the thing we need to do is to create a cut file that's going to tell the Shapeoko where to make these little notches at. So let's take a look and see how that's done. So this template file here is based off of the cut file that I created for cutting out the different pieces for the jig. This is the front piece that was on the jig, and I've just pulled it out by itself and created a pattern that I can base all my cuts off of. That way I know that when I make my cuts, they should be aligned perfectly with the jig. One other thing that you'll notice is that my Z point, my zero for my toolpath, is in the middle of the file. You may not be used to cutting this way, but it makes it easy for this kind of jig because we're going to center everything on this line. So let's go ahead and start by getting something that we can use to guide us, we want a shape that is basically the size of our board. In this case, mine is a 1/4 inch board, 4 inches long. All right. And I'm going to take that and just lock it down here to this corner. This is one thing that you're going to learn to do a lot of when you're trying to align things. You'll notice that when I mouse over these, I get my points, and I can lock that point to any other point on this. And it's really helpful for aligning things up. So now that I've got my board here, and I've got this as a reference for my width, I'm going to go ahead and create a block for our tool cut. And that one, I'm going to be using an 1/8 inch bit. So my width needs to be slightly larger than an 1/8. I'm going to do 1/2/6. So for the height, I usually make this twice the thickness of my bit and the thickness of my board combined. So I've got a 1/4 inch bit. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and err on the side of slightly larger. I'm going to go ahead and make this 1/6. So that gives me my cut area, and I'm going to grab this midpoint, and I'm going to go ahead and lock it to there. Right? And this will be one of my areas that I cut. Now, in order to make finger joints, all we do is we're going to copy these, and then we're going to grab them one by one, lock that midpoint for each one. You'll notice sometimes I catch the grid line and not the actual line, so just make sure that you're catching those correctly. You'll probably want to zoom in at some point just to double check that you've got everything aligned. So that's where our board is going to sit, and then these are going to be our cuts. And we're going to want every other one, basically. But before we do that, before we set our toolpath, I'm going to grab just these guys, and I'm going to bring it over here. All right, and clip that into there. So now I've got two sides. Then I want to go ahead and set my toolpaths. You're going to want to zoom in for this, because for your toolpaths, you're going to want to select every other one. So in this case, I'm going to start with this. Okay, and I'm going to make that first cut. It's going to be an inner cut. I'm going to use my 1/8 inch end mill. I'm going to speed this up considerably because right now it's held between those jaws, so I'm quite comfortable doing a 40 inch feed rate on that. Alright, those will be cut. Now I want this to go down slightly thicker than my wood. I like to leave the tails of these a little bit proud and sand them down. That just makes things a little nicer for me. So I'm going to go ahead and make those 2/7, and I'm going to call this left joints. Alright, then I'm going to reset my view, and I'm going to wander over to the next one, and I want to do the exact opposite pattern on this one. So on this one, I'm going to grab the first one, and then every other one. And if you end up not grabbing every other one, you'll know it, because nothing's going to fit together. Okay, so that looks right. Let's go ahead and do the same thing there. Bump my speed up again. Make that 2/7, and we're going to call that right joints. Okay. Reset view. So now you notice I've got the opposite pattern cut in each piece of wood. That'll allow those finger joints to sit nicely together, and we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and save our G-code, and we're ready to roll. Okay. So I've got 4 pieces of wood here that I'm going to use to make my box. These bottom 2 are cherry, these top 2 are maple, and that'll just give me a nice contrasting pattern on the side of my finger joints. So I'll cut the maple ones over here, and I'll cut the cherry ones over here. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're doing these joints, as you're doing them, your board is facing this way, right? And when you go to change it, if you flip the board this way, your joints are not going to line up. Instead, what you want to do is you want to flip it that way and put it back in, and that way those joints will line up on both sides. And you want to do the same thing with these. That'll keep everything nice and lined up. Okay, so like I said, this is a slightly different way of doing things. Instead of going ahead and trying to align things up from the bottom left corner or from the center or something, we're going from the center and then this edge right here. So what you're going to want to do is turn this bit so that the widest part of the bit is facing this way. That'll help you line things up and make sure that you're right on that edge. So we should be good to go here. I've got things set up. We'll go ahead and make our cuts, and this will cut through both of those at the same time, and we should be ready to go then. Okay, so now we've got our first 2 pieces, and let's see if they slide together. Oops. And they slide together just as nice and snug as they can be. And we've got ourselves a box joint. Now we just need to cut the next ones. Okay, so we've got these flipped over. They're lined up at the top. Everything's flush up here. Got the dust collection set up, and we're good to go on our next pass. Okay, and here's our little box. Dry fit together. Do some sanding and some finishing, but I think the joints on that are going to fit together really nicely and give us a really pretty box. And then I can start working on the top and bottom, and I'm probably going to put some little trays down inside of this. So hopefully this will give you some inspiration for the next time.